They were being evicted. She was pregnant. Carl cried when I handed over the check. $50,000 from my retirement. No contracts, just a letter. Because you're my son. I sat across from them while they promised they'd never forget what I did. Fast forward 3 years, and I'm being seated near the garbage bins at their barbecue because I'm too loud for the house. I offered to help wash dishes. Jodie said there's a system. I watched Carl toast to everyone who got them here. He didn't say my name. Not even a glance. That's when I realized I wasn't family. I was a problem they didn't want to look at. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. I was still holding the peach cobbler when I heard her voice. I hadn't even reached the patio gate yet. Just a few feet away, behind the slats of the wooden fence, I heard Jodie laugh and say, "Why is she even still alive one Sunday without the ghost, please?" For a moment, the world narrowed. I didn't breathe. I just stood there gripping the glass dish I'd woken up at 5 to bake. I thought maybe I misheard, maybe it wasn't about me. Then came the laughter. Not just hers. 2 others. Maybe 3. I knew every voice. My hands trembled as I reached for the latch. The gate creaked when I opened it, but no one turned. Not even Carl. I stepped into the yard and felt like I was trespassing. Folding chairs were set up under string lights. Children ran across the lawn in sandals and sticky fingers. The grill sizzled. I searched for his face. For any face. Nothing. Jodie brushed past me, holding a tray of buns. Her eyes skimmed over me like I was invisible. I smiled. She didn't. I stood there a second longer before Carl saw me and nodded barely. His hand made a small wave toward the back. I followed the motion. There was a table marked with a sign. Reserved family only. I paused. A younger woman took the last seat there just as I walked by. I ended up near the cooler and a stack of folding chairs leaning against the fence. One had a tear in the fabric. That was my seat. No table. No plate. No glass. I rested the peach cobbler on the ground beside me. I waited for someone to say something. Carl walked by with a beer and didn't stop. One of the little girls, maybe 7 or 8, tugged her mom's sleeve and whispered, "Who's that old lady?" Her mom glanced at me, then turned back to her phone. Just eat your hot dog. The wind was strong that afternoon. It blew my napkin into the grass. I didn't chase it. I just watched it tumble toward the hedge. I noticed my reflection in the silver cooler, the one holding soda and beer. I looked like someone who wandered into the wrong party. I used to make the cobbler every 4th of July. Back then, Carl would fight for the corner piece. Now it sat untouched. I sat alone next to a half-empty trash bag, the smell of grilled onions and charcoal ash mixing in the air. I waited for someone to ask me to come sit with them. No one did. The food passed around me like I wasn't there. One boy held out a platter of ribs to everyone, skipped my row, then offered it to the next. I stared at my hands. My nails were clean. I had put on the bracelet Carl gave me when he was 15. He probably didn't remember it now. At some point, the music started. Jodie laughed again, louder this time. The kids screamed in the bounce house. Someone called for group photos. I wasn't asked. I watched them pose near the porch. Carl had his arm around his wife, his kids in front. His smile was wide. Mine didn't exist. I sat still through it all, clutching the fabric of my dress in my lap. Not a single person looked back. Not even once. I had never felt so close to people and so completely erased at the same time. I wanted to go home, but I didn't want to draw attention by leaving. I waited like a ghost, unsure if it belonged to this world anymore. And the worst part, I believed them. I started to think maybe I was the problem. Maybe they had outgrown me. Or maybe I had let them. I still remember the day Carl called, his voice cracking as he said they'd been asked to move out by the end of the week. Their apartment had mold issues, something about a lease loophole, and Jodie was 6 months pregnant with their second. He didn't ask for money. Not directly. He just said he didn't know where else to go. I listened in silence, heart twisting, already opening my laptop. It took 2 phone calls and 1 long afternoon to initiate the withdrawal. $50,000. That was nearly a third of my retirement. I didn't hesitate. I remember sitting at the dining table, the checkbook in front of me, scribbling out the memo line before I could second guess it. I tucked a small note inside the envelope, folded neatly. Because you're my son. He came to pick it up the next morning. His hands shook when I handed it to him. He didn't open the envelope right away. He just looked at me with those soft, boyish eyes he hadn't worn since college. He called me his angel. Said he'd never forget this. That he'd tell his kids about the day their grandma saved the family. I believed him. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. That's what mothers do. We believe the best in our children, even when we know life has a way of making promises too heavy to carry. I didn't ask for a contract. I didn't ask for a timeline. I didn't even tell my friends. I didn't want to explain that I had traded security for faith and blood. Carl and Jodie found a house within 2 weeks. It was a small craftsman-style place on a quiet street with a maple tree in the front yard and a little porch swing already hung. He sent me a photo of the SOLD sign, and beneath it he wrote, "We're home. Thank you, Mom." I visited them the day they got the keys. The walls were still bare boxes scattered across the living room floor. I brought pizza and paper plates, and we sat on the carpet eating like college kids. Jodie leaned against Carl, her belly round beneath her sweatshirt, and asked if they could name the baby after my mother if it was a girl. I cried. Quietly, so I wouldn't embarrass them. That house became their everything. Birthdays, Christmases, backyard barbecues. I planted tulips along the walkway that first spring. Jodie hated gardening, but said they were pretty. I taught Carl how to replace a garbage disposal in the kitchen when it broke the second year. I bought them a new crib when the old one splintered. I didn't keep a tally. That's not what love is. Back then, I was welcome in every room. My casseroles were requested. My stories were laughed at. Carl always made sure I had the good seat near the window. He poured my wine first. There was space for me in their life, and it felt so natural, like breathing. It's funny looking back now how something so solid can become invisible. How warmth can disappear without ever making a sound. But in that moment, on that day with my retirement check still fresh in their hands, I was a mother holding the future of her family like something sacred. And I truly believed they would never forget. They said it was too loud inside. That's why they placed my seat out by the garbage bins, where the smell of old beer and burnt aluminum clung to the air. It was a warm afternoon, but the shade didn't help the sting. I sat with my purse on my lap, feet planted on uneven patio bricks, and tried not to notice that even the folding chair beneath me wobbled like it was about to give way. The kids ran past me with popsicles, their eyes sliding over me like I wasn't there. I smiled anyway, a habit I hadn't quite unlearned. Jodie popped out with a tray of utensils and paper napkins, her eyes sweeping over my lap before turning to the table behind me. She didn't say hello. She didn't say anything at all. I offered to help set the table. Just a quick, quiet gesture, a way to feel useful. She gave a tight smile and said it was better if I didn't. There's a system. I looked around. No one else was following a system. Plastic cups were stacked, crooked ketchup was spilled on a paper towel, and someone had dropped a fork into the planter. I nodded and sat back down. I watched Carl work the grill, his face flushed from the heat. He laughed easily with a neighbor. He poured wine into tall glasses, gave high fives to his kids, and passed out slices of corn on the cob. Once we used to grill together. He used to ask if I wanted extra paprika on mine. This time, he didn't look in my direction. When he finally raised his glass for a toast, everyone quieted. He smiled, turned to the group, and said to the ones who got us here. There was clapping. Laughter. Jodie leaned in and kissed his cheek. I kept waiting for him to glance my way, to gesture, to say her name. But he didn't. I looked down at my hands still resting in my lap. My nails were freshly trimmed. I'd even worn the earrings he bought me years ago for Mother's Day. Tiny gold studs I always said were too nice for every day. Today, I thought might be the right kind of day. No one noticed. No one asked me about the peach cobbler I brought. It sat unopened on a side table, still covered with foil. Someone moved it to make space for a tray of sliders. I watched them do it. Not roughly. Not with malice. Just the way people move something that's in the way. There was no shouting. No cruel words. But the silence had a shape. And it wrapped itself around me like a coat I hadn't chosen to wear. That night, I went home with the same cobbler untouched. The chair imprinted red lines on the backs of my legs. I stood in the kitchen and stared at my reflection in the microwave door. They had forgotten so fast. Not just what I gave, but that I was still giving. That I still showed up. That I still tried. It wasn't that they pushed me out. It was worse than that. They let me fade slowly and completely, as if I'd been a phase they outgrew. The message came the next morning. It was short. Just a few lines sitting beneath his name, still saved as my Carl in my phone. He said Jodie didn't mean what she said. She was just tired. Don't overthink it, Mom. There was no question about how I felt. No apology. Not even a simple, "Are you okay?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply bar. I thought maybe if I just waited long enough, he'd send another. One that sounded like him. One that sounded like he remembered I was a person, not just a role that had expired. I reread the message 3 times. Each time my chest grew tighter, not from the words themselves, but from everything they didn't say. The silence between the lines felt louder than anything Jodie had whispered behind that fence. He wasn't sorry. He was smoothing things over. He didn't want me to be upset, not because he cared, but because it would be inconvenient. I set the phone down and walked into the kitchen. The peach cobbler still sat on the counter untouched. The crust had gone soft overnight. I opened the lid and stood there, spoon in hand, but I didn't take a bite. I just closed it again and turned away. Later that afternoon, I picked up the phone again. I opened the message, reread it one more time, and felt something inside me harden. Not with anger. Not even sadness, really. It was quieter than that. Like a door clicking shut. I tapped the screen, scrolled to the bottom of the thread, and pressed the option that said block this caller. A small confirmation popped up. I hit yes. That was it. No fanfare. No second guessing. I sat back on the couch, the room still and gray with early evening light. The television was off. The heater kicked on. Outside, the wind rattled the porch swing he once helped me hang. I realized in that moment I had done the only thing left to do when someone shows you exactly how little they see you. I stopped asking to be seen. I stopped answering to pain disguised as love. For the first time in years, I chose silence over explanation. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood he never intended to listen. The drawer stuck a little when I pulled it open. It always did. I used to joke that it was magic keeping the little things safe inside. Inside were stickers with sparkles glow-in-the-dark dinosaurs, erasers shaped like cupcakes, and a tiny red truck with a missing wheel. I had picked each one with care, slipping them into my cart between oatmeal and paper towels, saving them for visits that grew farther and farther apart. I held the sticker sheets in my hands for a moment. The kitten ones were always their favorite. I used to peel off one at a time and place it on the back of their hands like a secret badge. They'd run to their parents to show them. Sometimes I wondered if Jodie ever even noticed. I started gathering it all. I found an old paper gift bag in the pantry, one with a faded snowflake on the front. I filled it until the bottom sagged slightly. A bouncy ball rolled out, hit my foot, and kept going. I didn't chase it. I just folded the bag shut and walked it out to the front porch. The wind had picked up. It pulled at the top of the bag until one of the sticker sheets flew out. The kitten ones. It landed on the porch steps, curled slightly at the edge. I stood there watching it flutter like something still trying to be wanted. A boy passed by with his mother. He pointed and asked if he could take it. She glanced at the bag, then at me, and said it wasn't anything worth keeping. That's just garbage. They kept walking. I didn't say anything. I didn't pick up the sticker. I sat on the porch bench and let the cold wood press into my back. It wasn't her words that stayed with me. It was how easy it was to believe them. I stared at the bag, at the edges of toys and memories poking through. I used to think they were little treasures. Now they looked like clutter. Like the things you sweep into a drawer when company comes over and forget about until you need the space. I leaned back and closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to justify why I kept them so long. I didn't need to explain to anyone that love can be quiet, that sometimes it comes in sticker form. None of it mattered now. What broke me wasn't the emptiness of the drawer. It was realizing I no longer knew who I was saving those things for. The folder had been sitting at the back of the closet for years. I pulled it out slowly, brushing off dust that left gray streaks on my palms. Inside were copies of bank records, a printout from the transfer to Carl's mortgage lender, and the letter I had handwritten on plain-lined paper. It ended with the words, "No expectation of repayment." My own signature looked so certain back then. I read it twice. The pen strokes were steady. I remember writing it at the kitchen table with the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background. I wasn't trying to be noble. I just thought love should be enough. I folded the letter and set it aside, then picked up my phone and dialed Lena. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. She used to work in estate law before she retired. When she picked up, her voice was warm but cautious, like she wasn't sure what I needed from her. I told her everything. Not all the details, but the ones that mattered. The money. The letter. The house that had my fingerprints all over it, but none of my rights. She asked me to read the letter aloud. I did, voice flat and calm, like it didn't belong to me anymore. When I finished, there was a pause on her end. Then she told me I couldn't get the house back. Not legally. Not without a contract. Not with that letter. But then she said something I didn't expect. You can't take the house. But you can take back your power. I didn't say anything right away. I stared at the folder, then at the empty mug beside me on the counter. She said I still had control over my estate, my legal decisions, my name on certain accounts. She reminded me that silence didn't mean surrender, that even without court battles I had options. It wasn't dramatic. No music rose up in the background. But something shifted. I felt it like a small crack of light under a heavy door. Maybe I couldn't undo what happened, but I could stop letting it define me. I could stop handing over my trust like a blank check. When we hung up, I stayed at the table for a while. I opened a fresh folder and began moving papers over one by one. Not as a victim collecting evidence. As a woman remembering she still mattered. The bank teller looked confused when I asked to revoke Carl's power of attorney. She double-checked the file, then asked if I was sure. I told her I was. I signed the new documents with a hand that didn't shake. My name, my choice, my control. It felt like reclaiming something I didn't know I had lost. Next was the lawyer's office. I brought my old will in a manila folder, its corners soft from years of storage. She asked who I wanted to name as beneficiary instead. I said I wasn't ready to decide yet, but I knew who I was ready to erase. She nodded and left me alone to make the mark myself. I opened the folder. Carl's name was there printed neat in black ink, just below the words "All remaining assets." I pulled a red pen from my purse. Slowly, carefully, I drew a single line through his name. Then another. I didn't rush. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to witness the moment I stopped pretending I owed him forever. The lawyer returned, glanced at the page, and said it was done. Just like that. The silence in the office wasn't heavy. It was clean. I walked out without making another appointment. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea. No pills. No restless pacing down the hallway. I brushed my teeth, turned off the light, and climbed into bed. I pulled the quilt up to my chest and let my eyes close without dread. For the first time in months, maybe years, I fell asleep before the tea turned cold. And I didn't dream. The blueberries were just starting to wrinkle in the fridge. I almost threw them out. But then I reached for the recipe card, tucked in the back of the drawer, the one stained with butter and age labeled birthday, only in Carl's crooked handwriting. I had followed that rule for decades. But that morning, I decided rules didn't hold the same meaning anymore. I laid everything out on the counter. Flour, sugar, lemon zest, the chipped bowl I always used for folding the berries in last. The silence in the kitchen wasn't empty. It felt full. I moved slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel every part of it. The measuring, the cracking of eggs, the buttery warmth in the dough as I pressed it into the dish. I didn't hum. I didn't rush. I wasn't making something for a celebration. I was making something because I was hungry and I deserved to enjoy something sweet. No one would be waiting for a slice. There wouldn't be any little hands grabbing for the first bite. That thought used to make my heart ache, but today it brought peace. As the pie baked, the smell filled the house. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the oven light glow against the bubbling crust. I didn't check my phone. I didn't tidy up the counter. I just sat there present. When the timer rang, I took it out and set it on the cooling rack, steam rising like a soft exhale. I cut one clean slice and placed it on my favorite plate, the one with the faded yellow rim I usually saved for guests. I poured a glass of milk and took it to the table. I didn't light a candle. I didn't need to make it special. It already was. That first bite was quiet. Not joyful. Not sad. Just simple. Blueberry warm, tart, and sweet all at once. I closed my eyes and let it settle. I wasn't feeding anyone else's memory. I wasn't carrying on a tradition. I was finally making something for me, and that in its own way was enough. I heard the knock just as I was rinsing the last bit of pie crust from the fork. I dried my hands on a towel and opened the door to see Kay, my neighbor from 2 houses down, standing with a worried look and a crumpled flyer in her hand. She asked if I had seen a gray tabby wandering around. Said her cat, Miso, hadn't come home since the night before. I hadn't seen the cat, but I stepped out and helped her check under the porch and around the bushes. The search didn't last long, but Kay stayed talking anyway. We stood near the steps, sunlight warming our arms, and chatted about the heat, her tomatoes, and how the mail had been coming late. It was the kind of talk I hadn't had in months. Unimportant, unhurried, human. I offered her a slice of blueberry pie. She blinked, then smiled and said sure. We went inside, and I set the plates down with 2 forks and poured iced tea from the pitcher I almost never touched anymore. She complimented the crust. I told her the secret was cold butter and an old habit of baking only on birthdays. She said she might steal that rule. Somewhere between her stories about Miso's habit of sleeping on the laundry and my memory of Carl's toddler tantrum over blueberries, I laughed. It was small, A soft sound from deep in my chest, but it surprised me. I hadn't heard it in so long that I almost didn't recognize it. Kay looked at me and smiled wider, like she knew it too. It wasn't a funny laugh. It wasn't from a punchline or a mistake. It came from being seen, from sitting across a table with someone who looked at me like I was here not leftover. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea or the pie. When she left, she promised to bring by a picture of miso just in case. I stood at the door for a long moment after she was gone. The kitchen was quiet again, but it no longer felt hollow. That one small laugh echoed longer than I expected. It sounded like a beginning. The paperwork took longer than I thought it would. Every line had to be initialed. Every box checked. I sat across from the broker and signed away my shares of the lake property, the vacation condo, and the family trust account I had opened back when I thought I'd spend my final years surrounded by grandchildren and warm Sunday dinners. When the last page slid across the table, I picked up the pen without hesitation. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I signed my name steady and firm the way I hadn't done for anything in years. The lawyer nodded, stamped the page, and said I was free to leave. I didn't feel free until the new will was printed, notarized, filed. My assets would go to an organization that housed women like me, women who had loved too long, women who had believed too much. I remembered sitting in their shelter 35 years ago, hand on my stomach, praying for a life that wouldn't mirror my pain. I never imagined I'd come full circle. My house was the only thing I kept. A small 2-bedroom with a creaky porch and peeling paint. It didn't need to be big anymore. Just quiet. Just mine. I didn't tell Carl. I didn't tell anyone. I just waited for the updates to process, for the new names to go into the system. I took my copy of the will and locked it in the drawer under the bed. It was the safest I had felt in years. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Why are you doing this?" No greeting. No context. Not even my name. I read it once. Then again. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. The kind that doesn't ask to be explained. The kind that doesn't need closure to feel complete. I pressed and held his contact. I scrolled to the bottom of the screen and selected block. The icon flickered, then disappeared. No sound. No final word. I set the phone down, poured myself a glass of water, and stepped onto the porch. The sun was just beginning to set. The trees threw shadows on the lawn, and the breeze tugged at the edge of the welcome mat. I sat in the old rocking chair and let the silence settle. Not an emptiness, a fullness, the sound of nothing left to lose, and everything I had finally claimed for myself. The mirror had always hung just above the dresser, angled slightly from age. For years, I had glanced at it only to check my hair or dab on a bit of lipstick before family visits. I never really looked. Not like this. This time I stood still. My face stared back with soft lines drawn from years of waiting. My hair had silvered at the edges more than I remembered. There were fine creases along my mouth, a droop in the corners of my eyes. But there was no grief there. Just quiet. For the first time, I didn't see someone's mother or someone's grandmother. I saw a woman who had survived. Not just the hard years, but the quiet ones. The years spent hoping for a phone call or a thank you that never came. I saw someone who had stopped waiting. My shoulders were straighter than I expected, my jaw firmer. I studied the curve of my cheek, the shape of my chin. These were not soft features anymore. They were formed by choices. Some painful, some late. But mine. I reached for a small wooden sign I had carved last week in the shed. I had painted the letters slowly, one at a time. No longer waiting to be wanted. I held it in my lap for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was just true. I stepped outside and hung it on the front porch just beneath the light fixture. The breeze shifted it slightly, tapping it against the wood with a gentle knock. I stepped back and looked at it from the yard. It fit. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed, and for the first time in a long time, the air felt like mine. Not borrowed from anyone. Not held in for someone else's comfort. Just mine. I sat at the old writing desk, the one I hadn't used in years, and pulled out a sheet of cream paper. I didn't rush. I smoothed the page with both hands, then picked up the pen and began. If someone ever finds this, I suppose they'll want to know why I disappeared. Why I stopped coming to holidays, why my name vanished from the family group texts, the birthdays, the memories. The truth is simple. I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I was done asking to stay. There's only so long a person can keep waiting for warmth that never comes. Only so many times you can smile while being erased. I gave what I could. I gave beyond what was healthy, what was fair, what was ever returned. At some point, I realized I had nothing left to prove. Not to Carl. Not to Jodie. Not to the grandchildren who didn't know my name. I wasn't a ghost. I was a person who had been made invisible, and I chose not to stay that way. So I rewrote the ending. Not with revenge. Not with bitterness. Just with a firm decision that my life would no longer orbit theirs. I redirected everything I built toward something that gives life instead of draining it. Toward women like me who once believed silence was loyalty. This wasn't an easy choice, but it was the first honest one in a long time. I hope one day if these words are ever read, they are not met with anger. Only understanding. That sometimes love means letting go of what keeps breaking you. The will is enclosed. My affairs are in order. My peace is mine now. I folded the letter gently and slid it into the drawer beside the final version of the will. I didn't seal it. It didn't need to be hidden. It just needed to exist. At the bottom of the page, I signed not with the name they used when they needed something. Not as Mom. Not as Grandma. But as who I truly am. Mabel Dorsey. Survivor. Owner. Free woman.